My name is Jonathan Reed. I'm 32 years old, and this happened on June 15th, 2019. I'd always believed I knew what fear was. Walking alone down dark alleys, sudden car breakdowns in the middle of nowhere. But nothing prepared me for the terror of being locked inside the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville. I'd been convicted of nonviolent drug possession, an offense I still regret, and shipped off to a place that wore its brutality like a badge of honor. Before I tell you the core of what transpired that night, let me introduce you to the players, the setting, and the slow-building dread that clung to every cold corridor and echoing cell block. The penitentiary itself looks like a fortress carved from stone. Tall, gray walls topped with razor wire, guard towers looming like vultures. Inside cell block 3, where I lived, the lights never fully went out. They hovered at a dim glow that made shadows dance across the concrete floor. My cellmate, Mike Dawson, a burly guy with arms thick as telephone poles, had been inside longer than I'd been alive. Mike was calm on the surface but carried his own scars. Knife slashes on his forearms and tales of fights that drifted through the block like rumors. Across the hall was a guy they called Tiny Flores, an ironic nickname for someone who was anything but small, a former amateur boxer turned lifer. Every morning before the sun dared to rise, the clang of metal gates would jolt us awake. We'd shuffle through a head count that the guards insisted be precise to the second. Lieutenant Harris, a tall, hawkish man with a voice like gravel, led the count. His thin lips never curved into a smile. He viewed us as numbers, nuisances to be controlled. Warden Clark, whom few inmates ever saw, ruled the facility with an iron fist and a twisted sense of humor. Lights out meant absolute silence, and any whisper could earn you 24 hours in solitary. I'd only spent 3 months inside when whispers began about unrest in cell block 5, tensions rising over inadequate food, overcrowding, and a guard who'd broken a man's ribs with his baton. Word spread like wildfire through the prison's arteries, and every inmate had an opinion on what might happen next. Some said they'd stage a peaceful protest in the yard. Others warned that blood would spill if the administration didn't back down. Mike just shrugged and said, "Prisons have their own ecosystem, John. It'll settle itself." I wanted to believe him. By mid-June, the air felt charged. The Texas sun pressed against the brick walls, making the hallways shimmer with heat and fatigue. I'd found a rhythm. Exercise in the morning, prison commissary runs in the afternoon, and quiet card games with Mike at night. Even in that hellhole, routines offered a fragile sense of stability, until the day the alarms screamed through the compound. It started just after lights out. I was lying on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, when the sirens shattered the stillness. The red emergency lights flared, and the intercom crackled to life with Lieutenant Harris's clipped orders. "Lock it down! All inmates to your cells immediately. Anyone out of place will be shot on sight." My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I scrambled into my cell as the heavy door slammed shut behind me. Through the small barred window, I saw a wave of inmates streaming into the corridors, shouts and curses echoing off the walls. A taste of fear rose in my throat. This wasn't the routine lockdown for a fight or a count. This felt different. The atmosphere was electric, charged with panic and adrenaline. In the adjacent cell, Tiny Flores was shouting at his cellmate, demanding to know what was happening. Their voices rattled my cell like artillery fire. I pressed my ear to the wall, but all I caught was disjointed noise. Clanging metal, frantic footsteps, and the low, menacing hum of guards mobilizing with riot gear. Suddenly, a deafening crash. The door at the end of the hall splintered inward. A group of inmates, faces twisted with rage, bulldozed their way into the common area. One of them swung a makeshift weapon, and another hurled a heavy bucket at the guard station. Shouts of "freedom" and "power to the people" reverberated through the cell block. It was a full-blown riot. I sank to the concrete floor, hugging my knees, praying they wouldn't tear my door down. The riot shield-bearing guards formed a battle line, batons raised. Sparks flew as someone lit bedding on fire, sending orange tongues of flame licking the low ceiling. Smoke filled the hall, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. That's when I heard the screams. A guard had grabbed an inmate by the collar and was dragging him face first into the fire. The man's screams were mutilated by the heat, but you could hear every agonizing syllable. I vomited, head spinning. Mike's voice cut through the chaos. "Reed, get down." He yanked me behind his bunk as Guard Harris stomped past, cursing and swinging his baton at anyone who looked at him sideways. The smoke made everything surreal. Faces flickered like specters, bodies convulsed in panic, and the fire's glow turned every shadow into a monster. I thought I would die of suffocation before the guard's cruelty could reach me. Then came the order I'll never forget: gas him out. Lieutenant Harris's voice crackled over the intercom again. High-pitched buzzing filled my ears, and a cloud of tear gas seeped under the door. Tasted like burning metal. My eyes stung so badly I couldn't keep them open. My lungs felt like they were on fire with every breath. In the throes of the gas, a distorted chant rose among the inmates. Whether in defiance or delirium, I couldn't tell. I vomited again, dry heaves that echoed down the cell block. Minutes, maybe hours later, they let us out one by one. My legs trembled as I stumbled into the thick haze that filled the hall. The riot was over, but the carnage remained. Broken backs of battered inmates, a guard collapsed in a pool of his own blood, and the acrid smell of napalm-like bleach that they'd used to clean up. I'd never been so cold in my life, even though sweat drenched my clothes. The prison medical team ushered me to an isolation tank to flush the gas from my eyes and lungs. I could hear distant screams from the people still trapped in solitary. Some were being beaten for refusing to return to their cells. When they wheeled me out 2 hours later, my vision blurred and my mind felt shredded. Mike was waiting, eyes hollow. "You saw it, John," he said. "This place eats you alive if you let it." In the days that followed, the administration imposed a total lockdown. No visitors, no yard time, and the lights stayed on 24 hours a day. I lay on my bunk counting ceiling tiles until I thought my brain would snap. Tiny Flores was moved to solitary. No one knew if he was alive. The void left by his absence haunted me more than the riot itself. Yet, amidst the horror, something unexpected happened. In the darkness and despair, I found solidarity. Strangers shared crumbs of bread and whispered words of encouragement through the walls. When a man named Davis Jackson nearly collapsed from tear gas poisoning, 2 other inmates carried him to the infirmary on their shoulders. These acts of compassion lit weak fires in my heart, reminding me that even in a place designed to strip you of your humanity, empathy could still flicker. I served the remainder of my sentence without another uprising, but the echo of that night never left me. Every time a siren wailed, my pulse would race. Every time a cell door clanged, I'd relive the riot. It took years of therapy and rebuilding my life after release to stop feeling like every shadow was out to get me. Still, I tell my story because it needs to be heard. Prisons are meant to punish, yes, but when they become arenas of unchecked violence, they break more than laws. They break souls. I lost friends, faith in the system, and a slice of myself that night in Huntsville. But I also discovered a truth. Even in the bleakest places, hope and kindness can survive. This story is over. Get ready for the next one. My name is Jonathan Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and the date was October 14th, 2017. It was a cool, gray Saturday when everything changed. That morning still feels as heavy in my bones as the iron bars that held me captive. I was working as a correctional officer at Cedar Ridge Penitentiary, a place I'd come to know as routine and unremarkable. But on that day, the walls themselves seemed to whisper an ancient malice I had never imagined could exist within a modern prison. I'd taken the job 2 years earlier partly because of the steady paycheck and partly because my best friend from college, Mark Hollister, was already on staff. Mark was 3 years older than me, a burly former Marine with a shaved head and a booming laugh that could fill the bleak hallways. He'd convinced me that Cedar Ridge wasn't just a job but a calling, to keep order among men who'd lost their way. Our other close friend, Elise Nguyen, worked in the warden's office as a clerk, responsible for sifting through inmate records and managing communications. Elisa was sharp as a tack, with a sarcastic wit that kept us all on our toes, and she sometimes joined Mark and me for late-night burgers at the Greasy Spoon on Elm Street. The penitentiary itself stood isolated on a windswept plateau 12 miles from the nearest town, Townsend Falls. Though modern in design, glass-reinforced skylights, steel mesh fences, electronic locks, its location and eerie silence always gave me the creeps. At night, when the generators hummed and the fluorescent lights buzzed, I could almost believe the place was alive, breathing through cracked concrete and metal grates. Rumors of strange occurrences. A guard who swore he saw shadows moving against all logic. Inmates who muttered about voices in the walls were dismissed by most as nonsense. But I'd heard them too, in hushed tones late at night. I want to pause here before the story truly begins to lay out the pieces on the board. You need to know who we were, where we stood, and what forces were already gathering. I was young but steady. Rock steady, my mother liked to say, keen to prove I could handle whatever the penitentiary threw at me. Mark was my mentor and my anchor, but his confidence sometimes veered into recklessness. I could see that now in hindsight. Elisa was the mind of our little trio, always analyzing, always one step ahead. Yet she never imagined how deep the darkness at Cedar Ridge really went. The inmates we supervised ranged from petty thieves to hardened criminals. There was Carl Red Houston, a gaunt man with fiery red hair and a rap sheet as long as my arm. He spent most days scribbling religious tracts or muttering curses under his breath. Next door to him was Terrence Big T. Williams, soft-spoken but massive, over 6 feet 5 inches tall, who claimed he'd never heard a fly but carried himself like a sleeping bear that you dare not wake. In cell block C, the oldest wing, the walls were stained and the air tasted stale. That's where most of the strange incidents happened. At the center of it all was Warden Franklin Hadley, a man whose crisp suits and clipped tones spoke of strict order. I had only met him a handful of times, always in his sunlit office with an unblinking portrait of President Lincoln watching over us. He ran Cedar Ridge like a fortress, but even he had a look of unease in his eyes whenever I brought up minor security breaches or the whispered rumors. He told me, "John, if you can't keep calm and carry on, this place will get under your skin." I thought he was warning me about stress. He was warning me about something far worse. It was the night shift when things started to go wrong. Mark was off duty that evening, visiting a sick relative, but Elisa was on the graveyard shift doing inventory in the administrative wing. I was stationed at the control room, a glass-encased cockpit overlooking the yard, with CCTV monitors flickering in a semicircle around me. The digital clocks blinked 2:17 a.m. when the first flicker hit the monitors. A flash of movement, too swift to be human, darting between yard lights. I leaned forward, squinting, but as I switched camera angles it vanished. A soft static hissed from the intercom, followed by a low, indistinct murmur, like voices overlapping in some forgotten motel room. I thumbed the radio to contact Elisa, but her channel was dead. "Elisa, come in," I called. Nothing. A second later, the lights in the control room dimmed and hummed, as though someone had turned down a giant dial on the building. Panicked, I reached for the main panel to flip on the emergency generator, but the switch was jammed. I forced it with both hands, willing it to budge, when the CCTV feed snapped back to life, only to reveal one of the prisoners standing directly outside the door. I couldn't identify him. He wore a gray jumpsuit, face obscured by shadow, arms folded as if waiting for something. The timestamp read 2:19 a.m., but that had to be wrong. No inmate had clearance to that area, least of all at night. With a pounding heart, I unjammed the switch and the backup lights flickered on. The figure was gone. I radioed for backup. Standard protocol would have me lock down the affected blocks and wait, but I dismissed it as a prank by one of the more cunning inmates. That's what Mark would have told me to do. Stay calm and trust protocol. Within minutes, alarms began to echo through the corridors. Soft at first, then louder, as if the prison's own skeleton was screaming. I watched on the monitors as doors unlocked of their own accord, gates rolled open, and shadows poured into the halls. The intercom crackled again, and this time I distinctly heard a whisper, "Jonathan." My blood turned cold. The voice was guttural, layered, as though amplified by a cavernous chamber. It called my name with an intimacy that felt impossibly personal. I stumbled from the control room, radio in hand, and sprinted towards C Block. The concrete corridors were deserted, the overhead lights flickering like faulty strobes. I passed cells with bars torn loose, hinges bent, and the pungent odor of fear thick in the air. I shouted for Elisa and for any guards on duty. Only silence answered. By the time I reached the corner overlooking the yard, the storm of shadows had dissipated, leaving behind a broken carousel of yard equipment and an unsettling hush. In the center of the yard lay a lone object, a battered wooden chair, one we'd used years ago for disciplinary hearings, its surface scorched as if branded. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I whirled, expecting to see an inmate, but it was Warden Hadley, pale and trembling, sweat beading on his forehead. He stared at the chair, then at me, as if he'd witnessed something he'd hoped never to see again. "We need to leave," he said, voice quaking. "Now." I hesitated. "What about the men inside?" He looked at me with wild eyes. "They're already gone." Before I could protest, he grabbed my arm and we raced for the administrative exit. Alarms blared overhead. Searchlights sliced the night sky outside. By the time we reached the gatehouse, the radio crackled with frantic voices. Guards calling in missing colleagues, inmates bellowing in terror. Mark's voice came over the channel. "John, where are you? The place is crawling with." "Mark, we need to evacuate." I cut him off. He swore, and then the radio went silent again. In the chaos that followed, we managed to herd the survivors, half the guard staff, a handful of inmates, onto the transport vans. No one could explain what had happened inside C Block. Some blamed a massive security breach. Others whispered that something supernatural had been lurking beneath Cedar Ridge since its construction. That night, as we sped away, I glanced back at the facility disappearing into the mist, its floodlights flickering like dying stars. Over the following weeks, official reports concluded a catastrophic mechanical failure, blaming the doors, the lights, even the radios. No inmate escapes were recorded. No bodies were found. Cell records showed every prisoner accounted for merely hours later, locked safely in their cells, and yet dozens of guards were missing. Mark was never heard from again, and Elisa refused to speak of that night, leaving her job shortly afterward and moving to Seattle. I transferred out of Cedar Ridge within a month, citing stress and health reasons. But the nightmares followed me, visions of that gray corridor, the scorched chair, the whisper of my name. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear the faint echo of unlatched doors swinging, as if the prison itself is still waiting, still hungry for the living. I never discovered what truly happened in C Block that October night. All I know is that some prisons aren't built to incarcerate criminals. They're built to contain something far older, far darker. And once you've glimpsed the hunger behind those bars, You can never unsee it. This story is over. Get ready for the next one.